right, Drew, welcome to the show, man. How's it
Thank
going?
you. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. Things
Yeah,
are
it's
going
good to have
well. Things are
you.
going well. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, yeah, I've been wanting to chat with you for a long time because I thought it would be really interesting. And we have a lot of our audience that's super into addiction, a lot of people who are in recovery, but a lot of people who have family members in addiction. And, one of the more common questions I get is, what do I do if I have a family member, a friend or family member struggling with addiction? How do I help them? So I thought it would be a cool opportunity I feel like you're one of the authorities I know on that topic, um, based on the
Yeah, I
work you
mean,
do.
yeah, it's a great question, and the fact that people are even asking it is encouraging. You know,
Mhm.
years ago, it was thought that you let the person kind of suffer and continue use until they bottom out and ask for help. And in today's world, it's we come from a place now much more of prompting care and suggesting, initiating, and I think the fact that people care enough to ask and want to help is great. Um, but if you know anything about addiction, some of the most common traits circle around sort of lack of awareness within the person who's using, right? They can't properly perceive and see the world as others are seeing it around them. And so they're missing a lot of the connection between how they're behaving and how they're using a substance and reality. And so, so I think when looking to help somebody, I mean, there's a few different approaches you can take. Is I think first and foremost, just briefly educate yourself a little bit about the nature of the condition. And I think you can find some really basic text and understanding, online, Mayo Clinic, Hazelden, publishing, YouTube videos where you can learn like some basic information about a person suffering from a substance use disorder. So I think that that'd be the first thing I'd recommend is just do a brief overview so you understand sort of maybe what's happening for them and what they might be experiencing, and it will give you a better idea of how to approach them because knowledge is everything and it really certainly helps. Second is, you want to understand that a person who is active in a substance use disorder lives with a lot of shame and embarrassment and
Yeah.
guilt for the way they're living and behaving. And that has to remain at the forefront of your mind when you speak to them. So anything accusatory or guilting or shaming will do the exact opposite of what you're trying to accomplish. Um, the person has to feel safe, has to feel not judged, supported in some capacity. Um, a person with a substance use disorder is very keen to kind of their surroundings. They usually can pick up on someone who's critiquing or judging or looking at them in a negative light, and that's going to push them back even further. So your approach is really everything. Coming
Yeah.
in with an open, kind heart, and trying to remember that this person is sick and struggling. They're not fully choosing to operate like this. A part of their brain is, and a part of their brain isn't. And so they're in this like kind of inner confliction. And so that's why I think arming yourself with some knowledge is the first step, to understanding how to help somebody. Because if you have some knowledge and you approach them the right way, they're going to be way more receptive than if you have no knowledge and you're more aggressive with them. They're gonna shut you out. So I always encourage family and friends before really ever engaging a professional to kind of have a heart to heart, let them know you love them, you're willing to get help, you're willing to help them in any way. So I think it just comes from being kind and caring and supportive, and that's really the first step. Unfortunately, that's usually not enough. They usually need to extend to provide additional resources or retain a professional or, um, you know, intervene with them or on them in some capacity. So that's just
Yeah.
the natural sort of course of what we're dealing with.
Okay. Yeah, that's super helpful. And that leads us into you being an interventionist, right? And it's this very specific. I remember, hearing you talk at the conference we were at recently about how it's just like this very specific period in the life cycle of, treatment intervention as a whole, right? Everything we do as a professional is we're intervening
Right.
in a way, right? We're kind of inserting ourselves into the process. And that could look like a lot of different things, but we say an interventionist because it's almost like the ultimate form of intervening, interjecting, taking a stick and putting it in the spoke
Yeah.
of this momentum that is someone's addiction. And from my experience, someone who's calling an intervention, by the time it gets to you, it's like a very serious situation. It's like you're a specialist who
Mhm.
goes in. I always think it's like you're kind of like Harvey Keitel and in Pulp Fiction, where they call him up and he shows up.
Yeah.
All right, make me a cup of coffee. Here's what we're gonna
Yeah.
do. But instead of getting rid of a body, you're
Yeah, it's a
helping
very
helping
yeah,
family.
it's a very specialized skill and service, right? So um it's yeah, by the time it gets to me, we're usually in more of the acute stages of a substance use disorder. It's progressed along. A person is typically experiencing physical withdrawal symptoms from the substance they're using. That being said, if I could have my wish, that wouldn't be where I'm brought in. I think early intervention is way more effective and successful. It
Yeah,
doesn't need to wait until, we're at the end of the rope, right? I'm a fairly approachable guy. I'm not aggressive. I don't think it's a lot to ask for to have me in your home having a discussion with your loved one about the opportunity and options of help, right? I'm certainly not going to bully them or harm them or make the situation worse. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a professional. My goal is to walk out of interventions further ahead than I did walking in, you
yeah,
know? So yeah, so I think it's it's as a quote kind of interventionist, I think there's a bit of a stigma. It's a little bit of a scary word.
mm,
It's an intriguing word. It's like it's a fear-based word, but it's exciting at the same time and confusing. And that word is every active user's worst nightmare. So it's it's a role I take very seriously, and don't take for granted. But essentially, I'm essentially analyzing a situation where there's an active substance user that's stuck in the grips of the addiction and has been unsuccessful at getting themselves out of it, either on their own or with a family's help.
for sure.
Um, and those approaches that they've taken are moderate to average to poor. They just don't have the wherewithal or skill set to really navigate a complex mental health disorder, right? So there's a time and a place for a professional to come in and guide the family and prep them and enter into a meeting with a person who's using uninvited, because typically a person with an addiction won't welcome a discussion, specifically with a third party about their condition, because that's a threat to their addiction, and they're not going to welcome that. Typically, they're not going to welcome that, especially by the time that I'm involved. And so, my job is to confront that illness, that addiction head on, and provide a voice of reason and support, and let the person know who's inside that we're going to help them get to the other side of this. We're going to help put an end to this, that they are valued, they are important, they are deserving of care. And we want to help create a pathway for them to do that. And it would be a disservice and unfair to them to not be here making this proposition. To sit here and allow them to continue to suffer would be the unloving thing to do, right? So
Yeah,
we are here because we don't want to see you suffer like this and be the person we know you don't want to be. We know there's a guy in there or a gal in there who wants to be someone else, not this person. And we're committed as a group to helping you. And so what happens with that dynamic is the addiction that's living within the person is kind of outnumbered, right? And this group of individuals and a professional kind of create a sense of power that can oftentimes supersede the addiction and provide some clarity for the person in that chair. And we take that window of opportunity that starts to open for us, and you can see it on the person's face where they start to kind of break down a little bit, and that's the addiction losing its pulse, losing momentum, and we sort of pull them out of that world and into a world of where they can start their recovery. So it's really a process of opening their heart, appealing to their better nature,
yeah,
reminding them how valid and important they are and worthy, and that this is not who they are or who they want to be, despite what they're telling themselves. and that we believe in them, and we cannot accept anything less than you becoming agreeable to getting help, because we can't sit here and watch you continue to do what you're doing. So a professional intervention is oftentimes perceived as a confrontation, as as an argument, as an emotional brawl. But that's never been the case for me. That's never been an intervention for me. I don't know how other people's have gone, but that's never been the case for me. I think if that was the case, I probably wouldn't have the job I have, because that wouldn't be very rewarding or enjoyable. My interventions are usually pretty calm. They're usually, filled with, emotion and some happiness, some fear, as it should, right? Because it's a very serious topic. But understanding how to navigate that situation and guide the person to a safe place to um, get sober and have some clarity and be able to make an informed decision about where they want to go from here, right? Because we don't decide for them what they need to do, other than get stable, get some introductory treatment, experience sobriety, and then they get to make the decision for themselves what they want to do.
For sure. And it's really insightful. And before we go deeper, like, how did you get into this? Like, what's the overview of your story, and how you got to be doing this very specialized role that you're in?
First and foremost, I'm in recovery myself from addiction, both drugs and alcohol. Suffered in my early to mid to late 20s, and few treatment stays. Eventually, it started to click. 2009, and at Hazelden, Betty Ford, and came out and decided that I wanted to be in the human services industry, and that it was an industry where I felt would bring out the best character in me, and that I had other skills in other industries, but I didn't feel like those jobs would really provide me the meaning and purpose and happiness that I would get from being in a place where I can help people. And so, what other place to be where I can be on the other end of addiction and try to provide guidance and support to people, families, and individuals who are stuck and who are struggling. So that's how I navigated into this world. About 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I think it was now. Or after I had a period of sobriety, I took a job at Hennepin County, where I worked as a county case manager on a mental health team, and really started, seeing the devastation of untreated mental health and addiction, and seeing people that didn't have family, that didn't have the support. And it was hard. It was eye-opening, it was sad, it was hard. And that motivated me to want to pursue the industry further. And so I went back to school and obtained a master's degree in addiction counseling from Hazelden, from their graduate school. And with that, ventured off into more of a private practice setting where it was just me. And, I knew that my skill strength didn't lie in a therapist office. It didn't really lie in a treatment center setting. I knew I was more interactive. I liked to think on my feet. I liked some of the crisis work better. And so I really wanted to continue doing that type of work within the industry, within my role. And so I began kind of marketing myself as, a consultant interventionist, and
Mhm.
got a lot of training and education from some other people about how to do that. And after a year of training, I started doing it on my own, and that was about 10 years ago. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I think, experience counts, right? 10 years of providing clinical intervention, you gain a really strong sense of what to do and what not to do, what helps, what doesn't help, what words are good, what words are bad. You've rehearsed this 1,000 times. So when you walk into a situation, I have a good instinct and idea of what to do and what not to do. And how is my role going to be more effective or least effective with this individual in front of me? So experience counts for sure. The amount of houses I've walked into sort of unannounced, and alcoholics and addicts I've
Mm.
spoken to unannounced. You know, I can really kind of predict what I'm going to walk into oftentimes with intervention. So that obviously helps, right? Knowing that. So it's a very interesting job. It's an interesting role. But I have found success in it.
Yeah, it's like an adrenaline junkie job within the field, right? You must have a little
A
bit
little
of that
bit.
in you.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little adrenaline. You know, you definitely do. I mean, one of the things I do when I train, other interventionists and my staff is the best thing you can do is keep yourself on an even keel, because
Mhm.
if you ride that adrenaline and those ups and downs of intervention, you'll actually burn out pretty quick. You won't last, because it's like having untreated bipolar. You're just like up and down, and it's tiring, right? So, you're about to walk into the intervention, your adrenaline's high, and then, you know, the person
Yeah.
agrees to go, and you're happy, and then they decide not to go, and then you're upset. And so you don't want to get on this roller coaster of emotions, and then the family is happy, or they're upset. So I always train my staff and talk to them that this is about, we're at work right now. You want to keep your emotions in check. You don't want to ride that roller coaster. You want to stay even keel. Um, the world doesn't depend on us. The outcomes are going to be what they're going to be. So we just need to show up and be professional and work hard.
Yeah, and when I train people, and I mean various different situations as far as effective communication, and whether that's you're in an argument with a spouse, um, in one of these type of situations, I always say like keep the temperature at an even 70, right? Because
Yeah.
like some people like gear more, in their style and their emotional style, just cranking the temperature up. It's like raw emotion, anger, happy, just like you said, positive, negative, and that could create a lot of issues. But then also sometimes it could be if you go too cold, right?
Yeah.
Then there's no emotion, there's a disconnect, and that can
Exactly.
work in an opposite way. So like, how do we have emotion in the situation, from more of a place of love, but also a calmness because they're looking to you. It's kind of like I mean, I do a lot of like um, comparisons to like dog training, and then people like get
Yeah.
upset with me because they're like, well, people aren't dogs. And
Yeah.
we all kind of are. You know what I mean? Like dogs are better. So like, I don't want to hear,
Yeah.
but like, it's like mirroring, right? If I'm
Yeah.
like angry, or if my energy is high, then that kind of gets mirrored, when you're training the dog, or just we have mirror neurons.
Yeah.
Like if I'm super hyped, that's going to change the energy of the
Yep.
room, of the conversation, where maybe the other person is matching my energy, or they go equal opposite and they retreat as much as I'm hyped up. So I think that's a good point, that it's important to
Yeah.
really keep that even keel.
Yeah. You don't want to be disengaged and flat, right? You want to have
Yeah.
emotion. You want to be available, present. Um, but you just need to be on a level of, of even keel. So you're not, up here. This can be a challenging place to live, and you don't live too long here, because eventually you're down here. Um, so yeah. So in this role of intervention, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things that we can't predict. There's a lot of up and down. So, one of the skill sets is to not get caught in that. And because you have to be the one with the rational thinking, right? The family's not, and the person who's using it's not. They're depending on you to be the rational brain in the group. So it's super important that I'm able to do that, right? And I'm not subjected to the anxiety and emotions that they're all feeling, that I'm sort of armed with enough um, training to not let that impact me. And so, the worst thing you can do as an interventionist is be caught in that emotional drama, because then it's like, well, you're not providing a good service. That just takes training and professionalism and time,
Mm.
and that's why I always recommend a person on the front lines facilitating interventions. It's more of a job you want to be a seasoned clinician, a seasoned professional. It's probably not something you want to start with. I think, if I could go back I may have given myself a few more years prior to doing that. I really would have.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have gotten a stronger base. I learned a lot out in the field, and I had great mentors that taught me, so I was lucky. But I really think to do interventions, the level of professionalism and expertise you possess should be, at the highest level. It's by far the hardest job I've had, and I've done therapy for a bit, and I've done some counseling, and worked a little in outpatient, and it's just those are very almost more predictable, right? You sort of know what you're
Yeah.
getting. It's more
Yeah, for the
scheduled.
most part.
It's more scheduled. Yeah, I mean, of course you're going to get variety, but with intervention, it's the unknown, that's because addiction is temperamental. You don't know what you're going to get.
No, yeah, it really is. And that's why, like you said, it takes a real specialist for this level. And two, I mean, it's like I've worked in psych units, where there's that level of unpredictability, but there's something unique about interventions. 'Cause, like, I'm trained in it and I've done
Yeah,
some, and I just like wasn't really for me. Um, but so like, I mean, I do a lot of intervening just in a different way, but just not in that
right.
model. And if the situation comes where that model is necessary, which definitely happens, I'm like, call Drew. But
Thank you.
it's not a big deal. But but like, let's say in a psych unit where you could have someone just breaking things and having a psychotic break or whatever, it's within the confines of these walls. Whereas where you're going, you're flying to some unknown location that you're maybe not familiar with. Anything could happen. This person could get
Right.
in the car and drive off. And so there's so many variables, so many possibilities of things that could happen. And that's what makes the job, just from what I see, so
Yeah.
difficult. So many moving parts in personalities. I don't know. And tell me, I'm curious too, is if you had what your experience is, because it's much more than like what I've done in this specific space. But it's like usually when it gets to there's a lot of personalities going on in the situation. A lot of times when it gets to the point of intervention, there's some dynamic that's often off. Um, that's extreme, right? So like either it's the individual who's just like extremely difficult,
Yeah.
right? They're just very resistant, they're hard-headed, they're strong-willed, they're willing to take things really far.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes you have a family that doesn't know how to talk to the person, or they have extreme personality, and it just creates this environment where you got to kind of come in and break it up. Like, do you
It's
find that?
extremely hard, Evan. Like you just nailed it. That for me, the individual who's using is not, even if they are stubborn, bullheaded, resistant. To me, that's not the hardest part of the intervention. It's the family.
I was going
Because
to ask you that, if you
as a,
thought that
as a
was the case.
professional, yeah, as a professional, it's like I can't force anybody to do anything, right? What I can do is I can challenge them, I can educate them, I can use motivational interviewing strategies, and I can use my intervention tactics, and I can push them and build that rapport, do everything I can. But at the end of the day, they're going to do what they're going to do. Okay. And they're going to live with their decision if they elect to not get help. Um, that doesn't mean that the intervention is not effective, right?
Yeah.
Because it has this kind of ripple effect, right? You made this drop, and now there's going to be a ripple of waves for the hours and days that follow. My professional experience is not a matter of if the person's going to get help, it's when they're going to get help.
Yeah.
And in all the interventions I do, almost everyone goes to treatment. It's just a matter of when. They're either going that day, they're going the next day, or they're going within a few weeks. Um, and that's contingent upon, us as the family and the support group kind of removing ourselves and pulling back and remember that
Yeah.
we said, and let's let it sit, let's let it digest. Um, but that's a very hard concept for families. And so what happens is the family becomes so distraught, right? They aren't able to kind of detach and remove themselves. And there's this extreme level of codependency, and they're dominated by fear. And then that
Yeah.
morphs. The way they demonstrate that is through anger, right? So they start lashing out, they start getting angry. It's your fault, Drew, or it's the drug dealer's fault, or it's his girlfriend's fault who's no good, right? They find an avenue to get angry at. So the addiction is somewhat predictable in its personality, right? We know what we're going to get, right? We
Yeah.
know the symptoms of addiction. Yes, the person's going to be defensive, the person's going to be shameful, they're going to be full of remorse and guilt, and they're going to be, whatever, all the symptoms that we see. We kind of know what we're going to get. And you can talk to a family and you can explain to them, these are the outcomes. It's either A or B, right? And so regardless of what it is, you guys are going to do the same thing, right? We're going to kind of work on taking care of ourselves and detach from the illness, because that's really what that's really what intervention is. It's creating change. It's creating a fork in the road, right? It's separating the family from the addiction, and it's helping the individual separate themselves from the addiction, right? And so
Hmm.
for the family, you're separating yourself regardless of what happens. So nothing really changes for you whether they go or not. You have to, well, let me rephrase that. The same change happens whether they go or they don't for you. You are separating yourself and starting to detach from the addiction. If they don't go, you got to pull back and you got to stop being held hostage by it and start working on yourself. And we're going to find ways to do that until that person's agreeable, because they will be. It's just a matter of time. And then same
Yeah.
with the person, either they're going to go to treatment and start learning how to detach from their illness or not. So intervention is about the starting point of change, is about saying we're ready for change, right? The family hits their bottom and says, we can't do this anymore. We need change. I say, great. You have control over that, but we don't have control over your loved one who's using. So we can make a decision on the day of intervention to implement change. And that person's either going to decide to do it or they're not. But the
Yep.
intervention is effective and successful no matter what, if you look at it like that.
If you
The
change the
problem is
system.
in terms of adjusting the family system, right?
Yep.
So the ones that
100%.
can kind of get that and process it after intervention, they feel fine. They say, no, no, no. We came in here, did exactly what we said we're going to do. And Drew told us he's either going to go or not. But either way, our role is the same. We're detaching from the addiction. We're going to start taking care of ourselves. I'm not
Yep.
going to be held hostage by it anymore. And I was like, and today was the day you truthfully and honestly told your loved one that you love them, you don't love their disease, and that is until you're willing to do the steps to separate from it, we're gonna detach because it's too painful to watch,
Yeah.
right? We
And
love
that's
you.
what the intervention is.
That's what the intervention is. And so what we oftentimes find is the addicted individual gets help, right? But if they don't actually enter a treatment program that day, it doesn't mean that this was not an effective process. It just means it's looking different and the intervention is moving at a different route, a different avenue, right?
That's
So
important. Yeah, because
yeah, it's
one of the
yeah,
things I found too, and I'm curious as your opinion on this too, is that usually in these situations, right, if a family's reaching out to you, they're involved. Because in a lot of times in these situations, a parent, family member, like, oh, Jimmy's just out doing heroin, but like he's just doing his thing. We're done. We're out. They're not usually calling you. It's usually the people that are really highly involved with
yeah.
that individual who are in their addiction. They're trying all these things. They're trying to help them, misguided or not.
Mhm.
And usually there's always a system of enabling somewhere in there, right? Which is like enabling, I would just view as providing help that is more harmful than helpful.
Right. Yep.
And, whether it's giving, and again, you said the word, it's always fear. Because like family members, parents often who are enabling are in this situation where it's like, I call it like being on life support. Where it's like, okay, I'm going to let little Jimmy do heroin in the basement because otherwise they're going to be doing it out there. They're going to be homeless and they're more likely to die potentially. But I'm also enabling and I'm
Yeah.
keeping the disease on life support. So now they don't have that
Yeah.
incentive or disincentive to change. And therefore their disease continues and they're still likely even in the basement, even if you're checking up on them to over. So it's a
Oh, for
tough,
sure.
so I empathize with parents. At the same time, if you stay in that fear, it keeps the system, you keep enabling them. And that's why what your job, it sounds like going in, is to change that dynamic, change that mindset, because then you're getting
100%.
rid of the fuel that's going
Yeah.
there. And then sometimes they just need to see what that's like to not get that enabling, to not get that fuel. And then they decide to change because if the system successfully changes, they can no longer operate within it in the same way. So then
Yes.
they're forced to either figure out a new way, right, to keep their addiction going, or or they're forced to change. And usually if they're that bad and they're that reliant on their family and they actually cut that off, it's like, what are my choices? I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get a job and support myself and pay my apartment and car insurance. And it's like a lot of work. It's like, all right, I'm just going to take the path of least resistance and go to
Yeah.
treatment. Right.
Yeah. And that's what we always see. And even for the adults who we do intervention on that don't go, it might take a day or two for them to fully process what's being asked of them. And then they decide to go. So, the addiction can't survive. It's like you're using that word life support. It has a hard time surviving without certain items fueling it, and
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes the family is the chaos fueling the addiction,
Yeah.
right? The person's using them to keep it going. So husband is drunk, passes out on the floor, pieces, pees in his pants. The wife cleans him up, puts him in bed, tucks him in. He wakes up the next day, everything's fine, right? Johnny's downstairs shooting heroin, and mom continues to give money. Johnny thinks everything's fine, right? So until there's a modification in behavior from the loved ones that are around the addiction, it is going to be hard. So although people call for an intervention and their idea is we got to get Johnny into treatment,
Yeah.
I'm like, absolutely, but that's a win if Johnny goes to treatment. But really, you know, we have to change this family dynamic, this system, right? And so that's really what it is. It's hard to fully explain that to families who are kind of so like, as a professional, you understand,
Yeah.
as professionals who are listening to this will understand. Um, but we cannot control or force people into treatment, right? Treatment doors are unlocked. There's no locks on the doors in any treatment center, only psych wards, and we're not going there. So the person has to be willing to go, and they're either going to go or not go. But the intervention's effective if you're able to properly disengage from the addiction. And that's why we're having this meeting with him, to let him know, or her know, we love you, we care about you, we know there's a better person there, and we want you to be that person. And if not, that's okay, that's your choice. We are going to kind of detach from your illness and take care of ourselves, because we can't be in a relationship with you while your primary relationship is with a substance that we're watching kill you, right? And if you're not willing to get help for that, how do you expect us to sit here and just be part of this life with you? It's painful. So we have to remove ourselves to save our own sanity. And we'll be here if you decide to change your mind. So we don't have to sell Johnny on treatment. We don't have to sell treatment's amazing. It's just, we don't
Yeah.
have to, we have to really just outline the facts, and remind them of who they are and where they may have lost themselves, and that's okay. And rehabilitation is very attainable, and it happens all the time. And this is actually a very treatable condition if people would actually follow the continuum of care. And so that's what the intervention is. And people are don't know that, Evan, right? People don't know that's what an intervention is, and so they're very reluctant to want to pursue it. And also people are really afraid to go down that route. They're controlled by fear, and so there's a lot of barriers to proceeding with intervention. I mean, I had 3 intervention calls yesterday. There's a good chance all 3 will not move forward to an intervention, despite all 3 families needing an intervention, because they're dealing with their own emotional barriers, right? That are
Yeah.
preventing them from proceeding, that they have
That's what
to.
I found too, is like half
Yeah.
the calls, and like that's why I kind of gave up as well. Like so many of the calls I would get just like wouldn't lead to anything, and you'd like do a consult and then they would just kind of be like, no, we're going to
It's
go our own
about
way.
25% conversion rate for intervention calls.
Yeah.
Uh, and it has nothing to do with money usually. I mean, money is I mean, we track everything here. I mean, I think 5% of our conversions don't happen because of cost. The 95% is because they're not ready. So what does that mean? They're not ready. I mean, they're not kind of, the family hasn't reached a point where they're willing to have this formal discussion with their loved one, you
Yeah.
know?
And I think, yeah. And then there's, also that fear, like you talked about. And then I don't know, I find that a lot of the folks who are pursuing it, and probably even more so the ones that do go through it, who maybe money isn't as much of an issue for that particular family, kind of their like vibe is like, well, they're the issue. We're just doing this for you to get them to treatment. And they don't really want to see their part in it, or they don't want. And it's just like a huge irony in it,
Mhm, mhm.
because like they want their loved one to go to treatment and like just uproot their life and just make these immense 180 changes, but then you ask them to go to like an Al-Anon meeting and they like are so resistant, like go to a meeting and like they won't do it, but then they complain, Jimmy's not going to meetings and da
Yeah,
da da
yeah.
da da. And it's like, do you see how you're like unwilling to do that? But I mean, I get that they're like, well, I'm
Right,
not the one with an addiction and it's not
right.
my issue, but
It's just lack of knowledge, right?
yeah.
They don't know. And the other thing I deal with all the time, Evan, is on these initial calls, um, I'll have a good call with a family and they'll understand, and they want their loved one to seek professional help in a residential setting. But then, they'll say, I just don't know if we need a professional at this point to help us. And I say, I don't know if you can hear what you're saying, but you're asking your loved one to go get professional help. But at the same sentence, you don't feel like you need professional help. I say it's kind of an interesting, if you listen to it, this whole situation is going to require professional help. And then they kind of scratch their head. They're like, oh yeah, I guess I didn't think about that. Um,
and
so
that,
this,
and that's more
yeah,
important. I
yeah,
mean, like, because you could do probably the whole thing in a way, a different way, like maybe if it was a little bit further upstream. But if you worked with them about changing their approach and changing their mindset,
mhm,
that you could avoid that, right? That they could maybe manage it better on their, because if they stop enabling, if they approach a situation different, that person would be more likely to go to treatment naturally, or if they just ask them or set everything up. Like that's kind of what I do more now with when I do work with families, is just like working with the parents, and that's not
yeah,
always, like things sometimes call for intervention, but when I'm working
sure,
with the parents, it's like kind of similar with adolescents, with like the parents whose kids they're Evan, fix them. They drop them off. I've so many times that the parents like, all right, I want to come in for at least the first 5-10 minutes of the session. They're doing this because they like really want you
yeah,
to know. It's like these are all the things that they're doing. Their kids are
yeah,
sitting there
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and then and
Take care of this
then
by the end of the session, okay? Would you?
yeah, then the parents are like, okay, here's my laundry list of issues that they need to fix. All right, good luck, Evan. Bringing them to you. Then they walk out. The kids look at me. I'm just like, well, now that they're gone.
Let's talk
uh,
about what's really going on.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And
yeah. No, I mean, I think if you were to poll all the admissions people at like Hazelden Betty Ford and you said, who are the callers calling you? Um, it's not the person with the substance use disorder. It's family, friends,
yeah,
and probation officers, lawyers, social workers, therapists. That's who's calling. Only a small percentage are the person who's actually prompting and seeking help. And that's because with substance use disorder, there's almost always an intervention of some type. It's it's not um it's not a condition where the person has enough self-awareness to realize what's going on and say, I need to go in and check into a facility. It just doesn't happen very often. And so I think only about 10 or 12% of people actually self-admit, right? And then, 80 some percent, and I read this a year ago, enter treatment through some form of an intervention, whether it's a family intervention, a clinical, medical intervention, legal intervention, or an employment intervention. So all these people are facing some type of intervention consequence, and as a result, they're prompted to enter treatment, right? So the problem is our society has it flip-flopped. We think 88% of people need to be the ones prompting and calling and scheduling their own admission. That doesn't happen. We're expecting that to happen. So like I have a lot of these calls and they're like, well, we're just hoping he'll come around and like realize he needs help and go to Hazelton. I was like, yeah, don't hold your breath there. He'd be a minority in the population if that were to happen. So again, I think we have in our industry some of the most uninformed patients and clients around. I just think it's hard for professionals to understand this illness. Imagine being a family member who doesn't know anything, right? And so we're that's such a challenge in our industry. We're trying to help people that don't understand what's going on and don't really even believe you, and so I think that's why there's so much severity and recidivism and problems in this industry.
Well, yeah, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about is like the mindset of someone in an addiction. And I try to educate people because the way I view it, right? Like you talked about this, we call people in like a contemplation stage of change, right? So like, because I feel like every person who has an addiction that's severe, despite how much it appears like they have no insight or desire to change, it is in there. But
Mhm.
the dynamic of you, they know, right? So part of them wants to change, and it's a quieter voice. It's right, like it's like the quiet, wise voice inside you. But then you have the addiction, which is this like dramatic kind of thing that's like hijacked you, right?
Mhm.
And it's almost keeping you hostage.
Yep.
And so basically, as a family member, when the addiction, the addictive part of your mind views the other person as a threat, then you're getting the addict side, right? You can't get through to that like
Right.
part of them that wants to change. So how do you break through this wall and get this person to have enough motivation and courage to challenge this, their captor,
Hmm.
right? How does that happen? So it's like kind of you're giving them an extension, you're reaching your arm out saying, hey, well, I'm going to make this as easy as possible
Yep.
for you to do this and shift and try to get this part of you in the back seat, not the front seat anymore. And so I think that's where people go wrong. And you were talking about all these tenets of communication, of, you know, approaching it from a place of kindness. Like all these things are to try to switch the dynamic and to get through to their higher nature and reduce resistance, right? So it seems like they are always resistant, always this, but that's because their disease is always being challenged, right? So when you
100%.
take that step back, then they're like less afraid, you know, then they could kind of come out. Is that
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, Evan, you're nailing it, right? So, you know, even professionals get annoyed and burnt out and tired, and they do a lot of this to the person sitting across from them.
it's easier?
Yeah, you're not doing this. You're supposed to be going to meetings. You're supposed, you got to do this. You got to do, what do you're gonna relapse. You're gonna, and so I mean, you can't shame people, and you can't do this to people with a substance use disorder. It's not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. It's totally ineffective, and it's a natural response of families when I say, "Here, write an intervention letter," and they send it to me. It's basically mostly talking about how the individual with the addiction has been unable to be a human because of their addiction, and that they slept through Christmas. They, don't do this, they don't do that, they suck at this. And it's just like, that's the natural tendency,
Yeah.
is to lecture and to tell them what they're doing wrong. And it just, it's a simple concept. You have to reverse that, right? Because all you're going to do is set them up to kind of kick and scream, right?
Well,
So
yeah, and those are all behaviors that bring their walls up,
yeah.
right? So then, like, and I view it that way too, where the usual combative nature brings their walls up. So now you're fighting a wall
Yeah,
to try to get through to them.
not
And you
gonna
could
work.
apply force,
Yeah.
pressure. You could literally knock the wall down, but think about how much energy, effort that takes. And even if it works, even if you by sheer force knock the wall down, get to them, grab them, throw them into treatment, there's side effects to doing
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
that's going to come back and bite you in the ass later because they're going to be resentful, likely forever in some ways. Like if you use those methods, you know, even if they get better, they may resent that. It'll screw your relationship up. It'll hurt, that'll make them feel worse about themselves versus like if you could use a little bit more of a mindful approach, which is not as convenient or easy or even natural, right? To take actually a step back and allow the walls to come down to, and the number one thing I find it takes is managing your own emotions, your own
Yeah.
fear, your own anger, so that you don't do the things to bring the walls up, because it's easy for them to put the walls up, but to get them to go down is much harder, more thought out, more
More
um
work, more skill.
yeah, it's more skill, it's unintuitive. I always think of it like boxing versus jujitsu.
Yeah.
It's like you want to go in, you're just like, okay, I'm just gonna, like, here's their addiction, I'm just gonna beat the shit out of it with a
Yeah.
hammer, right? And like that may work, but there's going to be side effects, and then if you left bruised and bloody, you're like, all right, I beat him into submission,
Well,
but they're like, oh, versus like doing a more
so
approached, skilled,
you come up with a couple really, really good analogies.
Mhm.
And I like the one with like the wall, right? It's like you're trying to fight through this wall and drag them out. And like the way I think of that is, if you leverage somebody to go to treatment, if you strong arm them, and that's just basically, you don't need to be professional to do that. You come in and say, you don't go to treatment, this and this and this are happening. We'll do all that. It's just a bunch of threats. So you try to leverage them and scare them into going. And they go and they have a horrible experience. They're pissed off, they're resentful, and they come out worse than they came back in. I saw that years ago in our industry when we had less trained people providing intervention. You would hear that over and over again. The interventionist who was, 2 years sober, just untrained, no credentials. Only thing he knew or she knew was, how they got sober. And you got to be tough. And, they get people to treatment, but the outcomes were horrific because they had zero knowledge or skill set on addiction, and they basically leveraged them to go. They gained all the leverage they could and went into the intervention and said, look, Evan, you either go or XYZ, blah, blah, blah is all going to happen right now. You decide. Right. And
They went to level 10 when they didn't need to, right? Sometimes you maybe
exactly.
need to do that, but you save that for, the very end,
You
right?
save it to the very end, and you also, every case is different. Not every case you want to do that. Because some personalities and people with certain mental health conditions, that could do more harm than good. So you really got to be measured and understand exactly what you're doing. And that's why, this part of our profession requires, I believe, much more oversight, because we still have people out there, who are cowboys, wrangling people and dragging them to treatment. But yeah, there's a time and a place for leverage, but you know, sometimes families will come to me and they'll say, so Drew, we're doing this intervention. I need to have my bottom line, right? I need to have my bottom line. I said, I don't know. Do you have a bottom line? I'm like, you don't need to create one for me. Do you have a position? I mean, you've called me. Where are you at? And they'll say, it's not my decision what you want to do with your life. I'll
Mm.
support you one way or another, but I'm not asking you to do that. If you've reached the point where this is unbearable and you can't live with an alcoholic anymore, I understand that. I get that. And if you feel like you're at the point where you need to leave, intervention is probably a good place where we can share that in a way that is, the person understands it and it's done with a little respect and it's done with an opportunity to get care. So there's a way to do it professionally where you're not hammering the person and swinging at them, where Evan, you have admitted here in this meeting, I'm assuming we're at an intervention here. Evan, you've admitted, alcohol is bad and you need to quit, but you're not willing to go to treatment. But you don't think you can quit on your own, but you're willing to try. You're asking that your wife sit here on the sidelines and watch this experiment. Is that fair? I mean, she has to continue down this path with you and observe you make these attempts without any accountability or professional support, try to change and modify a complex medical condition. That's a lot to ask of her to sit here and be part of that, where she's helpless. And I don't know if she's able to do that, and the person can start to kind of understand that what
Mm.
they're asking their loved one to stay while they maybe try it on their own is just not suitable. It's not enough, right? When we know there's proven evidence-based models that provide an avenue for recovery, and so, she's, your wife has decided that you're welcome to do this, but she doesn't want to sit here and watch. We obviously, if this works, great. If not, there's another option.
Do you
So there's
ever
a way.
provide options for them? Like, do you ever like say, like, kind of like strategically providing options of like, okay, we could do the outpatient. This is what that would look like. here's the residential option, or we could do nothing, but here's what nothing would look like, just to kind of put the ball in their court? Or is it more like, hey, we could go this route of treatment, or we could go this route of not, but like this is what that's going to look like?
Sometimes, I rarely though, we don't really, the reality of it is at the end of the day, clients have choice, right? People
Mm-hmm.
choose their level of care. We don't. Most people in that position are already aware of kind of the options on the table. There's an outpatient or inpatient, there's detox. They'll usually say, I'll do outpatient, I won't do inpatient.
And then what do
And
you do at that point?
well, I'll have a discussion around maybe some of the, pros and cons. I say, well, let's talk about that for a minute. And at first I'll thank them. I say, I'm glad you're willing and open to doing something. That says a lot, and I appreciate that. And part of why we're here is to kind of get something going. And they'll say, oh, okay, yeah, thanks. I was like, so I commend you for your courage to be willing to face this in some capacity. Now let's talk about if that is a realistic option for you, given everything that's going on. So I might say outpatient is most effective and successful when a person A is stable and sober and detoxed. B, when they have a home environment that's conducive to recovery and sobriety and supported. You have reliable transportation, and your employment or whatever it is won't interfere with that. So let's look at those real quick. Can we? And just see, and then I'll go through it. And there's a good chance that that level of care may not work. And I may say, based on my professional opinion, talking to here, I'd say you're probably setting yourself up for a very challenging likelihood of a good outcome here. Just based on what we said, I said, look, and I'll say, look, you're an adult, you're going to make your own decision. If you want to spend 4 weeks trying to make this work, that's going to be something you decide.
And what if they ultimately decide that? So, yep, I want to do that.
Then I'll support them. I'll stay involved. And, if I feel motivation and sincerity from the person, I'll support them. And usually in advance, I'll talk to the family. And I'll say, here's what might happen. He might say he'll go tomorrow. He might say he'll do outpatient. If that doesn't work, he'll do inpatient. The reality is, here's the thing. I've been doing this long enough to know the long-term outcome will be better if this person's bought in. So if he says, I want to try outpatient, I'll do 4 hours a day, 3 hours a day, whatever. If it doesn't work, then I know that I'll need to go. Now, it's a bad decision probably because we already know that he doesn't qualify for that level of care, but it doesn't matter, right? It's about long-term. So I used to be all about the short-term, when I was like younger doing this, I was like, no, he's got to go. But what I found is the outcomes were worse. So I say to the family, if they're bought in, we want to let them kind of do this if there's some treatment, because the outcome will be better long term. And I'll stay involved. I'm not going anywhere. And I say, yeah, it might be a hard 4 weeks for you, but it's worth it to have 12 good years, or whatever you're going to have.
Exactly. Then they're
You
more
got to
bought in.
And here's the other thing. It's unethical for me to drag someone to treatment who really is pissed, doesn't want to go, who had another who had another idea, because that treatment center is going to be mad at me. It's like, Drew dragged this guy here, he's fucking pissed. And it's just it's more appropriate for me to support that guy and let him work through his ambivalence. And that took me a while to kind of understand that intervention process is not an event.
Yeah. And how does that work? So it says, do you kind of get them to say, okay, look, we'll go with outpatient, but do you agree? And maybe do you even do it in writing? Like, do you agree that if you have a relapse or two or, whatever, that you will agree to go to this treatment? I'm assuming you had set up for them, or you have care, out of state option or something ready for them.
So that's the key, right? So, all right, so Evan, we're doing your intervention. You say outpatient. I say, all right, Evan, look, you seem motivated. You really want to do it. Let's do this. Are you cool if I help you and partner with you to kind of get this going and make sure it's effective? And you say, yeah, I will. All right, so I'm going to hold you accountable, and we'll try this road, and hopefully it works. And that's awesome if it does. And if not, just want to make sure you and I have an understanding. If you relapse, or you continue to use, you're not able to make it, or you get asked to leave for using that, you allow me to check you into the residential program that we have. They always will say yes. because they really
Yeah,
firmly
yeah.
believe the
Yeah, because
outpatient
they
will work.
believe it's like we all know
Yeah.
probably not realistic, but it's like
So,
at that moment they're like, well, of course this is going to work, like,
yeah.
and I think they actually do believe it, or at least they're
and
just not
and
willing to.
in the last like 12 months, I've had this happen like probably 3 times. All three of the people, only one made it to their intake. The other two were
Hmm.
drunk and they didn't make it. One made it to his intake and never started because they kept using. So all three ended up going to residential. Now they went a week later. In our world, it's nothing, but to the family, it's like an eternity. Um, so yeah, so I think intervention is a process. It's not an event, right? It's about change doesn't happen overnight. It's going to happen over time. And that's why you got to be really well versed in this to understand what to do.
So for those individuals who like it is more of a process, who don't agree right away, how do you work with the family? Are you just on the phone with them, advising them, or you get on the phone with the person, or do you go back and have another in-person meeting when we're like, okay, this didn't really work out the way we thought, we tried the outpatient, what does
Mhm.
that look like, the second meeting?
Yeah, the second meeting is typically if they're obviously unable to follow through, I'll show up again. And I'll have the treatment set up and I'll just, hey Evan, we talked about this and we obviously wanted to support you and you made this attempt and it's all good, man. It just let's get you the help you need and
And they
outpatient.
usually just say yes.
Yeah, always. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they're usually like pretty tearful about it in my experience. Just kind of feeling pretty shitty, like, wow, I really couldn't do this.
Yeah.
Uh, well, so what we did was it was like we elevated the bottom, this like bottom people kind
Yeah.
of selectively hit. We like forced them to kind of have this realization that, all right, I need to do something. Right. And then we 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 kind of forced them to make an attempt at sobriety, that didn't work. Right. So intervention is super effective because it prompts, you know, these it prompts change, right? It influences their thinking, right? It throws off the addiction. It's like, oh, if they don't go and they're home, it's like, what am I doing? I'm drinking this bottle and I'm thinking about my family. It's like, what am I doing? Or I'm going to do this outpatient. It's going to work. Wow. I couldn't do this outpatient. I can't stop drinking. Like, I guess they're right. Like, I do need to get some help. Like, so it prompts thinking that the person wouldn't otherwise be thinking about, and that's why you have to look at intervention like that. You can't look at it as like we show up, take someone to treatment, because it doesn't work like that, right? It's got to be looked at as a process of changing the way the addicted individual is thinking about recovery, and
Yeah.
that's what.
Yeah. No, for sure. And it was interesting. So I had the situations where I took like a new therapy client on, had never met him. And they were like, I got to be honest. I relapsed. I'd been sober for a while, I relapsed. I'm coming down off meth. They were like pretty like poised still. We're like, yeah, I'm having a little bit of paranoia. And you can see the blinds are closed and they're like very poised about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, is it okay if we still meet? I'm like, yeah, we'll still, do the intake at the end. I was like, look, like I'm going to be honest with you. Like, it's like you've been through this, you've been to multiple treatments, your situation, how hard it is to recover from meth, to do it on your own. Like, my recommendation like would be to do a residential, but I know that that's hard to do, to get the motivation to uproot your life, to be out of your comfort zone, to be out of your home. I know that's hard. Could I justify outpatient? Maybe, like, maybe we can make the case, maybe they would let you do it, but how hard that would be. But here's, here, like, kind of emailed them a list, like, here are some places to look into, and you just let me know. Then he's like, okay, thanks. Give him some time, right? The next day, I wake up to an email, a long email of like, yeah, the police were at my house yesterday. I thought there was an intruder and like da 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 da. Like, I want to look into these options. Can we talk? Right. And instead of being like, no, 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 like, we
Yeah.
got to do this. We got to do
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
now. It's kind of like push in, pull back out. Because
Yep.
like when you pull out, they're not used to that,
Right.
to pulling back. I shouldn't say like pulling out, but to pull back. Because they're just so used to you being in the face,
Yeah.
go, 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 go. But then all of a sudden you change that dynamic. It's kind of like a dance, and then you pull back, and then they're like, whoa, no one's ever given me that autonomy before. They just keep telling me, And then sometimes like it's almost like a reverse psychology in a way, where it's like if you were like, hey, we really want this, we got this set up, for you, like, oh, I want to do outpatient, and like, okay, and and then they felt like, okay, we'll get treatments off the table now. I mean, you don't do that, but they'd be like, wait a minute, why is treatment off the table? Like, now I want
Yeah.
to go. There's like,
It's very much a dance, Evan. I think you
yeah,
nailed it. It's a dance. Intervention, like you were doing, like we're all doing intervention if you're in this industry, right?
yeah.
So you're doing intervention. It's always a dance. You come in too hot, you're gonna lose them. They're gonna feel like you're pushing and pressing too hard. They're gonna get sketched out.
It's
You
a
know,
fight.
yeah, I mean they're gonna fight. They're also super keen to that. Like they don't people using don't like that. If you don't take a gentle approach, it's gonna be hard.
Yeah,
You
so
know.
exactly, it's a dance, not a fight.
Yeah, you can go in hard and then pull
And then
back.
pull back. Yep.
And then,
Exactly.
sometimes I'll say, you're asking a lot of this family right now. Just so you know, you're asking us to leave here, let you keep using and titrate yourself off of heroin. You're asking us a lot. I just want you to know that. And that I think you're putting us in a pretty unfair position. So I'll come in
Hmm.
hot, I'll go back and say, but look, dude, you're in this game. We're here if you want it, but hey, if this is what you want to do, man, it's like it's your call. I wouldn't do it, but you can come in and come out, come in and come out, and that's a lot of what intervention is. Because you got to press them a little bit, but you
You
can't
have to
press.
let them save face.
Yeah, you can't press them where you're gonna lose them, and that's where it's just like you're a skilled therapist. I've been doing this for a while too, but there's a lot of people who don't do that. They don't know what to do, and then they're either too passive and they're like, whatever, 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 whatever you want to do, or they're overly aggressive. And it's just like both approaches aren't good.
What I find in a lot of these situations and where people go wrong, and it may sound a little weird, but you don't honor their ego. You don't honor their sense of self. So when you put them in a position where if they say yes, you win. And if
Mhm.
they view it that way, that's why I kind of talked about like providing some level of or at least just laying out the options, even if it's like one is horrible, but be like, you could just kind of lay it out for them honestly. Allowing them to save face a little bit, allowing
I,
it to be their decision, then they're more likely to do it, because if you say, oh, you have to go to treatment. It's the only thing, and then they say yes, that means they're wrong. That
Mhm.
means they lost. That means that, not just they made a wrong decision, but they're wrong. And so they're more likely to say, fuck it, I'm going to use, even though I don't even want to, even though maybe I want this help, but, you're just being disrespectful. You don't give them an out.
So if I'm going to do an intervention, that's what we would call more collaborative, Evan.
Yeah.
We would prep in advance with the family to say, let's give them some options and it basically means they're not as acute in their condition,
Yeah.
right? If they're shooting IV heroin every day, we're probably not going to do that. But if they're, just drinking at night or something where it's not as bad, we can do more collaborative where I say to the family, let's give them the options, see what they want to do. I'll stay with them, keep working with them for a month or 6 weeks or 2 months. And I'll basically bid out my intervention cost based on that. I'm saying this is going to be a longer ordeal. But we're going to end up in the right place. It's going to take a little while, and we'll come in knowing that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
I don't go to like a more serious intervention and come in and do that because I think it's dangerous, given how severe the person is. But the skill of an interventionist is also to help raise their awareness about the benefit of a residential treatment, and what is the best use of their time, right? And helping them understand, why this is probably an effective process for them to seek residential for 4 weeks, get detox, get stable, get some tools, and the things you are wanting to do that you can't do, you will then be able to. So there's a case to be made, Evan, why you should consider that. And then so you can have a conversation about it,
Yeah.
as long as you're doing it in a respectful
Yeah.
way where it's based
Laying
on
it out.
their goals. Nope, you can do that for an hour or two, and then, but if they're really dug in and fixated on that's not going to happen, it's not going to happen and it shouldn't happen.
Well, is the
Otherwise,
other option some of those bottom lines then of just like, here, like realistically, I mean, because it's within the parents' rights to be like, look, if that's the case, we're going to ask that, within a week or two, that you move out of the house, that you find a job. We're here to love you and support you. But, kind of the traditional like TV Johnson model intervention, we're reading the letter
Yeah.
of like, if you don't go, I'm still going to love you, but I can't help pay your car insurance anymore. I can't. Is that are those the times you go
Yeah.
into
I think,
that?
yeah, I think towards the end like that, we'll say, look, you have the choice to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
But we don't want to support that, right? We find it's a bad use of our money and it's putting your life at risk by us providing you a safe place to use. So today we're going to withdraw that. We're not going to do that. But you've told us today you feel pretty confident that you're functional, so that shouldn't be an issue for you. So let's do that, and let's you proceed and see if this is something you are able to manage or handle independently, or you say you don't need this help, and maybe you don't. Then you should be able to be self-sustainable. So again, Evan, it's about the way you say it. You definitely, if there is enabling, you want to discontinue it, especially at the intervention is a good place to do it towards the end. And you want to deliver it with respect, right? And if you can do it that way, you're fine, and you'll eventually get the outcome you want.
So, real briefly, because I mean, I guess a lot of people listening may not know quite as much, but like, what is the process of working with you? You kind of said you do it a couple different ways, but like, call Drew, sign the like, let's say I have no idea. Someone says,
Okay.
yeah,
So
I call someone I know in the field. They say, Drew's the guy to call. I'm like, okay, yeah, intervention. I have a rough idea of what that is. I call you. What does that process look like from start to finish? Overview.
So I take an initial call, usually from a family, mom and dad of a child or spouse of a husband or parents, whoever it might be. Usually spend 30 minutes, just 30-40 minutes, just gathering some initial information, learning about the case, the family dynamic. Um, then I would request a Zoom call or a face-to-face meeting with all potential participants or people who are worried about the individual.
Mhm.
We schedule that Zoom call, usually about an hour and 15 minutes. The first 20 to 30 minutes is learning about the person and determining for sure if they are in fact needing an intervention. Are they in fact having a substance use disorder? Sometimes they're not and they don't need me. And we kind of weed that out right there. After learning a bit about the family and the person, then I would talk about my recommendation of what I would do. So in this case, we need to do an intervention. The individual's, living in their apartment and they're using heroin, or whatever, pick your situation. They need an intervention. They need most likely a residential setting, as they're having
Yeah, if
withdrawal
it gets to
symptoms
that point.
daily. Yeah. So, assuming at the end of that call, they agree and they feel like, yeah, we want to do this, Drew. I say, okay, next step is a few things. Number one is you would retain me as a consultant interventionist, and we have some pretty standard paperwork we send out
Mhm.
electronically, and one person from the family, signs off on it and hires us. The fee is dependent on a number of factors. Where's the intervention? Is it out of state? Am I gone for 2 days? Is it down the street from me? Is it more traditional intervention where we show up and read letters and do that? Or is it a collaborative intervention? All that's discussed on the Zoom call to really determine. And then, I provide my quote and bid based on what I hear. I say, here's, I've done this long enough where I'm able to, say this is going to be, $3,300 and here's what it's going to look like. And, so I take them through it, assuming everyone agrees. I send them out the contract. They hire me, retain me. And then simultaneously, we look at, if we're headed to a residential center, getting the person's insurance information, finding it, locating it, getting into the treatment center, confirming benefits, simultaneously working with the concerned persons, the team, to prepping and preparing them, getting them writing letters, handling the logistics. I assign a point person for logistics and we work with them, um, setting the day of the intervention. When are we going to do it? And then, we get together for a pre-intervention prep meeting the
Yeah.
day before, so if the intervention Saturday morning, Friday afternoon, we're going to get together from 4 to 6. We're going to spend 2 hours together, going through the whole intervention from start to finish, the do's and don'ts, who's doing what, where are we sitting, where are we parking, what are we saying, what is the likely outcome, what are they going to say if we say this. And so we'll take them through the whole thing. Following morning, we meet at a location and drive together to the site where the person is, pull in and enter the home and proceed with the intervention. At that point, we just need a person to agree.
Is it
Treatments,
always a surprise?
90% of the time, yes. Say 10% no. For my cases, Evan, I don't get a lot where they are an invitational intervention. We will try sometimes. I'll say, do you want to tell your husband that you're talking to an addiction professional and that he would like to speak with you? And the wife will say, okay, I'll let him know. And then she'll call me next day. I told him, and he says, good for you. I don't want anything to do with it.
Mhm.
So, so that's that, right? So, if there's an opportunity for them to engage, yeah, we can do that. But I'd say most of mine are more traditional where they don't know. But again, we would deal with that on the upfront
Yeah.
preparation period. We would determine what type of intervention is going to create the best outcome for this person. And really keeping that at the forefront of my mind. What's going to be the most effective way to get this person some form of treatment? And let's use that approach. Sometimes with young guys who are like 18, 19, 20, living at home, I'll have the parents like 3 days in a row say, hey, we're talking to a guy named Drew. He's a counselor. He wants to talk to you. Will you talk to him? And then they say no, like 3 days in a row. And then we show up on day 5 to do the intervention. I'm like, dude, what's up? I'm like, I'm Drew, the counselor. Like, I've been trying to talk to you, get a hold of you for a couple of days. Like, you wouldn't talk to me. And they'll say, like, oh, I'm like, yeah, like we had no choice but to come here. Like, we need to talk about a plan. So I do that on the young guys. It works really well because it takes a lot of the kind of punch out of the intervention, because then they feel like somewhat responsible. Like, damn, I probably should have talked to him. I could have avoided this. So
I
that's one
remember,
strategy.
yeah.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
remember once you said, I remember years ago you did like a presentation. I thought it was funny. I remember you said that you're like the young heroin kids. You're like, I'll take those every day. The hardest are like the older, like more self-reliant alcoholics.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. Like the 55-year-old male alcoholics, they're so stubborn. They don't want anyone to tell them what to do. Um, so
Well, they
yeah,
probably have more options and resources too.
yeah, oh,
Like
they
some.
do. They have a job. They can take care of themselves. So yeah, so that's the process with me. I mean, sometimes we'll do 2 Zoom calls before we're hired. I mean, we take time. We might spend a couple hours with families before they hire us, and
That's nice. Yeah, it's nice of you.
yeah, for sure.
Real quick too, what's the history of intervention? Like, how did like the way it's done? I mean, it's done many different ways now, but it all kind of comes from this one, reading the letters, like kind of what you see on TV most often. Like, well, like where did it come
I
from?
mean, it came from the Johnson Institute. It came.
What it was that?
I don't know all the detail, but I know that it was he wrote a book. I don't know his first name. Obviously, his last name is Johnson, but he wrote a book on intervention, and he created this like learning institution model for addiction. And it was, I don't know what year it was, in the 70s, maybe 60s,
Hmm.
uh, where he created, the intervention statements, which we've modified. We don't really use those, but where they talk about, if you go to treatment, I'll do this. If you don't go to treatment, I'll do this. So I think he was onto something. He was definitely created, an option, a model, and I think it was pretty effective for many years. But it's undergone some rearranging. I mean, as long as there's been addiction, there's been intervention. I mean, tracing back to the 1700s, they've always been trying to find ways to treat alcoholism and addiction for years, mostly unsuccessfully, up until probably the 90s, where we really started to see more gains in treatment and more medication assisted therapy. But historically, the treatment and outcomes have been absolutely horrendous with addiction, because the knowledge base of the clinician has just been horrible. The educational piece as well. They would take people who went to treatment for 30 days, and then on day 31, now they became the lead. Now they would help the people coming in. I mean, that was the old model. That's how they did it, back in
Yeah.
the 50s, 60s. So um, there was, it's not like, medical care or, psychiatric care. Addiction is just in a world of its own.
Yeah, and it's definitely evolved to like, there's different models out there of it
Mhm.
too. And it seems like you've kind of made your own, you've like developed your own from like what you've learned in your experience, just having so much experience, but I know like I got trained back, like in the Arise model,
Mhm.
which is more like invitational and but very similar to a lot of the things you were saying, where it's a little bit more open. You have like kind of different levels to the game, and but yeah, there's just a lot of
So,
different ways of doing it.
yeah, I mean, the reality for me is, I'm a clinician, right? I'm a licensed mental health professional and I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. And I've been doing this type of work for over 10 years. I don't think a training that somebody's created is really going
Yeah,
to help me. For me, I assess every situation differently and use my clinical gauge and judgment on what I think is going to be the best approach for this identified patient in front of me. So I think my model is obviously more advanced.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
because it's not a one size fits all. It's I got to hear what's going on. Based on that, I'll be able to write up a plan.
yeah, for sure. I mean, do you ever thought about doing that, like making your own model or doing broader trainings for people who want to do this?
Yeah, so not creating my own model, because I don't think that's something I can own. I think I would definitely be open and interested in training, um, really because I hate to see more harm created, and I think in this particular role, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to cause a lot more problems. So training is definitely something I'm looking at, definitely in my future, as I sort of do less intervention and more training. That's my hope. That's what I really want to do. That's probably a couple of years, 4 or 5 years away, but it's definitely in my plan.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I think, in some of these trainings, it's almost like a flow chart, like if this, then that.
Yeah.
And like, in some of the older ways, just a little bit more simple, right? It's like, all these different possibilities, but like kind of what you're saying is it is so complicated that it'd be hard to put it into a model
Hmm.
of what if this happens, you could do it to the best you can, but it is
Hmm.
really difficult. But that would be really cool to,
Yeah.
have more training available, using your experience. So I was curious, how many do you think you've done, or do you know how many you've done in your life?
I don't know how many I've done. In my
What's your
busy year,
best guess?
I don't know, 900 maybe, 800, 900,
We'll just
950.
call it 1,000, because I was thinking of like titling this something like lessons from 1,000 interventions or something like
Yeah.
that. We'll go
I
through.
don't know. My busy years, I do 100 a year. Um, so some years 70, some years I've done 2019 or 20. I can't remember. I did like 100 and 120 something.
That's
Yeah.
unbelievable. So like one every like few days.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've had
That's
weeks where I've done four
wild.
or five. So yeah, it's
You had
hard.
what? You had one week when you did
I
what?
I did 4 or 5 of them in one.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, man.
it
So
just sounds exhausting in my head. But I
it
mean,
is, it
when you have
is.
experience, right, it's intuitive, right? You go in,
Yeah.
I mean, you have a process and it's not as like daunting. It's
No,
still
no, you know
tough,
what you're
but
doing. You have confidence in yourself. You know how
yeah,
to do this, so it's different. It's something an experienced person can do.
for sure. And so I guess like my last question from like well, maybe I gotta, what's like one story, one or like that stands out to you, like a story of like hope, like one intervention that really stood out to you on an emotional level, perhaps, if you have one.
Oh gosh. There's yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a few. I'd say like Um, I mean, I don't know if I call like there's this one case, that stands out to me the most. His name was Jim. Um, he was a lawyer in New York City. Graduated top of his law class, University of Denver. Um, Smart, very, very smart. I think he might have had an MBA also. But anyway, he was a general counsel for some company in Manhattan, New York City. He was like 31 years old. Um, and he I'm trying to remember exactly what happened because this was about 4 years ago. Anyway, he went to Las Vegas. And people had reported in New York he was acting a little kind of manic.
Mm,
Uh, they weren't sure if it was the cocaine or if he was having some type of psychotic break.
yeah.
Anyway, goes to Las Vegas and parties there and never comes back to New York. Stays there, keeps partying. Oh, say partying, that's a nice way of saying continues to use, drugs and gamble. And he started off in the Bellagio in a suite. Um, then he worked his way down to more of a 3 star, then a 2 star, then a 1 star, and now he's sleeping in, wherever he can find a place to sleep. And he's out of money. He's been there 5 months, and and now he's homeless. Right now he's homeless in Las Vegas, and so the family calls me, tells me the whole story, and they just say,
Wow.
we don't know what to do. He's in Vegas somewhere, and this is, I remember this is like 2018 or something. I went, um, and they said, can you help us find our son and get him help? And so I said, okay. Um, so I went to Las Vegas and we used kind of a trail of information to locate him. Long story short, I ended up finding him. It took about a day. Um, was able to, you know, um, get him into a hospital where he started to get treatment and get rehabilitated. And mentally, he was really unstable, and he was psychotic from methamphetamine and all these other things, which led to his homelessness, which led to multiple arrests while in Vegas. So he was arrested like 17 times in like 5 or 6 months. So he
Wow.
had this like big criminal kind of rap sheet that he had
That's a
created.
quick downfall. He's working like this, and he just went to Vegas
I
one
know.
time and just stayed there until he like hit
It was crazy. Yeah. And so he ends up getting out of the hospital, and I'm back in Minnesota, and he goes out and he reoffends and goes back to using, and he's a couple more weeks and he's out using, and really, really bad off, really, really, really horrible experience out in Las Vegas. And he got beaten up, he got robbed, all sorts of issues. Anyway, I go back, and because he was incarcerated, and I end up going in front of the judge, and the judge releases him to me, um, and permits him to go out of state for treatment because the judge realizes that Las Vegas isn't good for him. Um, during this time, he also had lost his license to practice law. Obviously, lost all his money. Had some pretty serious health issues from living on the street, infections, just a lot of
did
issues.
he have a like a mental break? I mean, that
He had
just
a
sounds like that just
he did it, but it was interesting. It's kind of substance induced.
where you
Most of the
think you
stuff
just like tap out somewhere in that
yeah.
process. I mean, that's like really quick. Like
So I went back to get him. I presented in front of the judge, and the judge was a little reluctant to let him go. The judge was like, he's looking at 2 years in jail here. It might just be better we keep him in jail and give him his meds. And I made the case to get him to treatment. So the judge did finally agree to release him into my custody. I took him to treatment, um, and I took him to treatment in Florida. And that was a little, it was about, I don't know. I don't remember how long it was. I think this was 2019 now, so it's a couple of years. But his name's Jim, obviously, and he ended up getting better. He ended up getting healthy, getting sober. He's on medications, being treated for bipolar disorder. He worked his way back up from the bottom, all the way back up. He's now a licensed lawyer in the state of Florida, and he helps people that were, that are in trouble due to substances and mental health. And he takes whatever they can afford and he helps them. And so he's based out of Florida, and I still talk to him. He sends me pictures of different things, and when I go down there for work, I see him. So
That's
it's a story.
awesome.
The story that stands out to me. It's just like, I don't know. It's just incredible. It's like recovery is possible. Like you can come back from anything. That was a unique story for me because that's not a typical case of mine, but it was
No, that
just
sounds
cool.
pretty
Yeah.
outlying, you
Yeah.
know.
And he had to like pass the bar in Florida, and it was like super hard. And he came a long way, so
That's
it's a cool
amazing.
story. Yeah.
So yeah, just before we hop off, like what's just maybe just overarching, like, if someone is has a family member struggling with mental health addiction, as far as like communication with them go, like what are some quick pieces of advice for them, like as far as what you would recommend of how to talk to them, like what are kind of.
You know, let them know the basis of why you're talking to them, because you care, because you love them, because you see that they're not happy, um, and that you're happy to help them in any way possible if they're open to the idea. I think that's what I would start with. Um, you as an individual, not as a professional, are limited to how much you can do. So you ultimately want to get them assessed and get them in front of a person that can help facilitate treatment. Um, my caution to you is if you're talking to a loved one and you're getting into a debate around their addiction, around getting help, and they're firing back and you're firing back, I'd advise you to stop. You're going down a rabbit hole that doesn't have a good ending, and you're creating more separation between yourself and your loved one. So I'd really caution you on going down and having this debate. If you sense defensiveness and unwillingness to open up and talk about a solution, I wouldn't go any further. I don't think it's effective for your relationship. And I think it's out of a friend or a loved one's ability to manage what to do or say. That's something where you're going to want to contact a professional like myself, or call, look for resources that can guide you. So those are my initial recommendations, Evan. It's a starting place. You can
Mhm.
feel them out. Again, if you sense that, reluctancy to engage, I think you want to discontinue the conversation.
That's really helpful. Do you think that like sometimes a family just doesn't think to ask, like
Mhm.
like if they're just like, would you do this, like would you, would you go to treatment, like literally just asking them a question and that they say no, okay, instead, like, do you feel like people just miss that
They
step?
do. They do miss it. And it would be better if they just came out and said, would you consider going to treatment? We'll help you. And the person says, no, I'm not willing. Okay, I guess we know where they stand.
Yeah,
Now
yeah,
what's my options? Engage a professional. Um, get my own count. They can get their own counseling if they're not ready, and they can start talking about options for themselves.
yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
Well, Drew, man, thanks. This was so helpful. I think a lot of people are going to find benefit in this, and I wanted to talk to you for a while and pick your brain a
Yeah.
bit and just
Yeah, it's fun.
get your experience on some of these things, after having experience with it as well, and just knowing how much you actually do. And I guess what's always stood out to me is that you still actually do this. Like
Yeah.
I know that you don't need to, probably. You have a lot of
Yep.
stuff going on. I mean, we didn't even get into that, but like you've really created a continuity of care, starting an outpatient. You even started a detox center, which is like that's not easy. One of those.
Well, I mean, I think, Evan, the reason why is because I'm really passionate about intervention, and I do believe that if I'm handling it, it's going to get handled right. Right? It's going to be the person's going to be treated fairly, the family's going to feel okay. And I know that. So part of me feels like if I can do that, I should do that. Even if I don't need to, I feel like I can help people, because I do think their options are pretty limited to who else could do what I do. I don't mean to say that in like a grandiose way or anything like that. I just, I've just done it for so long, and I feel like I'm really honest and ethical, and I'm going to do right by them. So I feel like I'm doing a disservice if I don't keep doing it. you
Yeah, you're
know?
providing us. Yeah, again, like I was saying, like very few people do this. It's extremely like you're like a special forces operative,
Mhm.
because of how hard these situations are, and there's a huge need. So, I mean, I'll thank you on behalf of the community for doing this, even though you probably don't need to.
Yeah.
That's kind of for me, like how I feel with therapy, even though like maybe
Yeah.
I don't need a caseload, but it's just like I'm super passionate and I
Yeah,
love doing it. Where a lot of
exactly.
people will be like, I don't want to do therapy, like,
Yeah, yeah.
so that's super cool. But yeah, man, I appreciate it. And you and I will be in touch. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
See ya.